a lot everyone for joining us today in this masterclass session. Today we have some amazing speakers with us for this masterclass. We have Sonupam Kaur. Uh, she has led products for American Express for the past 8 years, and now she is building products for Walmart Labs.
Just a quick introduction for myself. So I do have about 10 years of professional work experience. Bulk of that is, working with American Express as a senior product manager. Here, essentially, I worked on scaling a lot of mature products, but also conceptualizing and launching new product lines and taking it globally. And very recently actually shifted jobs, and currently I work with Walmart Labs, which is the Fortune 1 company in the world. And so not very long ago I was in all of your shoes, preparing for interviews and giving interviews. So when the opportunity landed itself, to present on how to ace the product management interview in this forum, I totally grabbed it. And what I'm really hoping for is that, I would be sharing a lot of my personal experiences through the interviewing journey. And I really hope that, you can put up a few advices or a few tips here and there, which you guys can benefit from and also leverage them in your interview preparation as well as in the final interviews, right? So looking forward to that. What I've also done is prepare like a brief deck, right? So that I can navigate through all the pointers with you guys. So just give me one quick moment for me to be able to share it. And Kevin, I will look to you to confirm, whether it's visible or not.
Can see it, yeah.
Okay, great. So I think first and foremost, what I wanted to do was, to set up the stage and basically talk about the various kinds of skill sets that you may be likely to be interviewed upon, right? So I divided into 4 key buckets, right? So problem solving, analytical ability, a lot of situational or behavioral questions, and technical depth, right? Now we will be going into each one of these in detail in the next few minutes. So first, let's start with problem solving, right? So typically in your initial part of the interviews, you could be asked, questions around, one typical question is to say that, pick your favorite product, or rather pick your favorite app and tell me how would you really improve it, right? Now here the interviewer may actually give you the name of the app, let's say LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or they may leave it up to the interviewer to pick up one app and then, work around it. Another variation of this question would be where the interviewer could give you like a hardware product, right? So say something like, which lies in the domain of product design, to say that, why don't you design an alarm clock for the blind, or, refrigerator for kids, right? So these could be certain typical questions, in this domain. Now, as you would notice, a lot of these questions are fairly open-ended, right? So what would truly help you here is to have a toolkit which you can leverage to be able to provide certain structure for the articulation of your response to this question, right? So here I've tried to cover broad categories. Ideally in your problem solving interview, you should touch upon all of these aspects and build your answers around it, right? Now, let me take an example and walk you through it. I feel that ways it will become easier for me to speak about each of the pointers, and it will also give you guys a feel as to how to approach it. So in fact, in one of my recent interviews, I was asked that, how would you go about improving LinkedIn app? Right. Now, here the first step for me would be to ask a lot of clarifying questions, right? Convert this open-ended, vague statement and provide it more structure, right? So when I think about certain clarifying questions, the first thing that came to my mind is, what are we really trying to solve for here, right? And typically you could bucket this into 3 categories, right? So is it that we're trying to drive higher acquisitions? Are we looking for higher user engagement? Or does it have to do with retention? Right. So these could be certain ideas that you can throw out to your interviewer and then work with your interviewer to, define the scope of the problem. Let's say your interviewer says that, I'm looking for higher user engagement. In that case, another helpful thing is to, at that stage itself, think of a metric, that would resonate with this goal, and then use that metric in your conversations down the line to be able to assess certain solutions and also see which solutions would you really prioritize so that it moves the needle for the metric that you and your interviewer have aligned on, right? So for example, let's say if it was acquisitions, you could say, is it the number of mobile downloads? If it's engagement, you could say, are we looking to drive, more daily active users? Are we looking to drive more sessions per active user? Is it more time spent per session? It could also be, the number of monthly subscriptions, right? So these could be certain metrics that you could throw out and work with your interviewer to select one, right? Let's say that you decide to work on, number of sessions per active user, right? So your goal right now is to improve user engagement, and the metric for that is going to be number of time spent per active session by an active user, right? Another clarifying question that I would ask here at this stage is to say that, are there a certain specific set of users for which you are trying to make this improvement, right? So this could be by geography or by any demographic variables as well, right? Now, once you have been able to ask a lot of clarifying questions and identify the exact scope of the problem, the next set of step would be for you to build user personas, right? And, Rahul did touch upon a lot of these aspects. So what I'm going to do is to, spend lesser time here. But essentially, like even Rahul touched base on, you have to think of different user personas who come to this app, right? What are the various use cases for which they're using the app? And if you could, list down a few user pain points, right? And then once you have this structure in place, that's when you move into your solution, right? So the idea is to be able to really flesh out the problem itself rather than jumping onto the solution, right? So for example, in the case of LinkedIn, your user personas could be, let's say, an active job seeker, right? Who's there on the platform actively looking for jobs that would suit his or her profile, right? A second user persona in this case could be, an active recruiter who's trying to look for suitable or potential candidates to be able to fill it. Other could be, let's say a lot of passive users who are there on the portal, not necessarily actively looking for jobs, but they're on the platform for interaction and engagement, right? So these could be few set of user personas that you can walk through. And then the next key thing would be to, identify a few use cases for which you would like to solve for, right? Now, remember, you can't solve for everything in that 1 hour of interview, right? So you really have to figure out one use case or one, user persona for which you would like to suggest, improvements in this discussion, right? So for example, let's say, along with my interview, I decided that, okay, I'm going to focus on the user persona of active job seekers, right? Now here, then I'm going to throw out a few, use cases, right? That, an active job seeker comes to the portal, searching for jobs, right? So can I make enhancement to the job search engine itself, right? Second is, once they're able to land up to a job of their interest, how does the user application journey really looks like, right? The third is that, once they're able to apply, how can they see the status of the different jobs that they have applied for to really understand where is it that their application may be moving forward versus not moving forward, right? So these could be a few use cases that you can define in the interview, right? Pick one of these use cases and then start to think about the various solutions that you will have at hand to solve for this specific pain point, right? So for example, let's say you were to say that, the job application process today is quite tedious, or rather than tedious, I would say not so standardized. For certain jobs, you could do like a fairly simpler process on the LinkedIn app itself and upload your resume and apply it. Whereas for certain other kinds of companies and jobs, you're required to visit their, official website, create an account, and then, upload a resume and then apply, right? So this process is not standardized. And in some cases, it can be fairly time consuming as well, right? So one of the solutions or pain points that you can look at is that, can we look into a one-click apply kind of a solution for the user so that, this person is able to fairly quickly apply for the job. The second thing that you could point out is to say that, today, while you can apply for jobs on the portal, there's no way for you to actually understand at what, level is your job application in, right? Is it under consideration? Has it been rejected? Have you been shortlisted for a first round of interview, right? So can we add those features so that, the job seeker is not left second guessing to understand what's really going on with the application? But here, one thing I would like to call out, while you can suggest a lot of few changes, right? The goal here, or what will really give you the brownie pounds, it's to be able to come up with different innovative solutions, right? Which would really set you aside from rest of the crowd, right? So think of certain big problems, and with that, think of certain bigger solutions, which could really move the needle for LinkedIn and, in specific to the metric that you're looking for, right? So one example that comes to my mind is that, can you really synergize, let's say, LinkedIn Learning with the LinkedIn platform, right? And in doing so, you will be able to, have a user hooked on to both the platforms and also leverage, other sister platforms that LinkedIn has, right? So let's say, can you suggest certain LinkedIn trainings, on LinkedIn, which would help improve the chances of someone, applying for a certain job, right? So certain big scope or big level problems and solutions would really help you get a few extra brownie points, and also really set you aside from, rest of the other interviewers, that this person may be meeting for finalization of this job. The seventh point that I have here is actually to consider a lot of trade-offs, right? So as product managers, you will have a lot of solutions. You could think of a lot of features, right? You could have a lot of customer inputs or a lot of inputs from business teams, etc. But how do you really, understand which are the features that you want to work in the short term versus which is what you want to review in the next quarter or in the next year, right? So for that, it would be helpful that, let's say, if you were able to shortlist a few features, right, like the two or three that we discussed, right? For example, a one-click apply, the second one being the ability to be able to check the status, and the third one being the integration with the LinkedIn portal, right? How would you really prioritize between these solutions, right? You could speak about a few trade-offs, right? What would be the certain pros and cons of each of these solutions, right? And also link it back to the metric that we discussed upfront, right? Which in this case was more number of time spent per session, right? Which feature will really move the needle for you in terms of this metric that you're aligned on to begin with, right? So that would, correlate the entire problem and close the loop for this, problem statement that was thrown at you. Another thing which I would say, if time, permits in that discussion, a few other things that you can call out is that once you have, a certain set of features aligned, right, it would be good to understand how would you really measure the success of each of these features, right? And how will you roll it out in the market? Will you open every feature for all users? Will you first like to do a A/B testing, open it for some, not open it for some, read the results for a certain time frame, could be 4 weeks, could be 4 months. And then what is the metric on which you will assess to say whether this feature is a success for the primary objective that you had or not, right? So in doing so, you may monitor a few metrics, or you may also look into a lot of, customer feedback, right? Either through surveys or through in-app messaging, right? So capture a lot of customer feedback to really know whether customers are responding positively to this feature, or would they like this feature to be certain other way, right? And a good example of that is that how in this session, Piyush is actually also taking in, a lot of surveys, and through the poll trying to assess, how good the sessions was, where is it that we can improve, right? So this is like a live example of how, people are really trying to check in whether it's really resonating with the customers or not, right? On this point, I would also call out that, it's best to actually rehearse and practice some of these sample questions on your own, right? Maybe walk this through your mentors, so that you're able to get, valuable feedback, and, you can really refine your answers. Another point that really helped for me was that, these days, all of the interviews are virtual, right? Sometimes it can be difficult for your interviewer to really understand what you're thinking through and how you're thinking through it, right? So it may be helpful for you to, probably share like a notepad or a deck, start noting down some of the important pointers, and, speak your mind, right? So that your interview at all stages is being able to understand how you've broken down the problem, and, at what stage you are right now and what is next to follow, right? So doing certain things will really help, make sure that you and your interviewer are on the same board. At this stage, one more tip that I would give is that I would also highly recommend you go through some of these common apps, right? Let's say LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and just see what are the various set of features that are there. And, as a consumer, you yourself, what features do you feel, if were added, would really improve the user experience, right? So having, a deep dive into some of these apps would also really help you be able to articulate your answers when you're in the interview process. With this, I would probably go on to the next set of, skill set that you are likely to get tested on, which would be around your analytical skills, right? Now, typically under this domain, people generally ask a lot of estimate questions, right? So think of questions like, how many flights fly out of the Bangalore airport in a day, right? Or think of, questions like, what is the number of washing machines that get sold in India in a year, right? So some of these estimate questions, right? Again, here having a structure will really be able to break down the problem for you, and for you to be able to structurally answer this question. Now, remember here, no one really knows the correct answer, right? So don't worry too much about the right answer. Don't also worry doing, too complicated maths, because that is not the real skill that they're trying to test for. What they're really trying to test for is to see whether you're able to really break down the problem into smaller chunks and have an approach to address each of these chunks, right? So they are really trying to test you on that. Now, here again, this can be quite open-ended, right? So, for example, if I were to work on, the number of flights that fly out of Bangalore in 24 hours, you could refine the scope of the statement, right? Ask a few clarifying questions to say that, what kind of flights are we really considering here? Is it like passenger flights? Is it cargo planes? Is it, individual jets? What is the real scope of the problem? Let's say your interviewer says, let's work with passenger flights. Another follow-up question could be, is it domestic, international, or both? Let's say your interviewer says, let's work on domestic flights. So great, you have been able to narrow down the scope of the problem. What you next need is a good starting point, right? From where you will start, then, slice and dice that using a few relevant variables to be able to break this problem down into smaller chunks, right? So let's say that in this case, let's say that you were to say that, in any given airport in 24 hours, you were to say that there are certain, times which are more peak times, right? Where you can assume that the airport is working on 100% capacity. Whereas there are certain times which are like non-peak hours where the airport is working in less than 100% capacity. Now here, when I say less than 100%, is it 50? Is it 20? Is it 80? That is something that you can use as an assumption, right? And just make sure that you clearly state that during the interview, right? So let's say in my case, I'm going to say peak hours is where the airport is running on 100% capacity, whereas non-peak hours is where the airport is running, let's say, at 50% capacity, right? And here, try to use numbers so that your calculations become easier, right? So which is my fifth point here, right? So even though it could actually be 40%, but I sense that doing any maths with a 50% number would be, would actually make my calculations a lot easier, right? So as long as I state that, that is good to go, right? Now, next, come on to the next point, right? So let's say I would say that my peak hours would run 1/3 of the day. So I'm assuming here that, peak hours would run 8 hours in the day, 4 hours in the morning, let's say 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., and 4 hours in the late evening to night range, let's say 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., right? And then the remaining 18 hours for me would be the non-peak hours, where I'm assuming 50% utilization rate. Now, the next thing is for me to say that in peak hours, or rather, so to say that, how much time does it really take for a plane to take off, right? So let's assume it takes around 2 minutes. I'm also going to look into, that how many runways are there, right? And let's say I assume that there could be 2 runways which are getting utilized, right? So here, then I need to start plugging in these numbers, right? So let's say how many flights will go into my peak hours. So I have 8 hours, right? And, every plane takes about 2 minutes to run, right? So by that, 30 planes will be able to fly out in a year. Once I multiply it with 8, that would be around 240 planes, right? And let's say if I have 2 runways in Bangalore, that would be around 480 planes in these 8 hours, right? Now, these 480, I can safely round it up to say 500 planes, right? So like I said, the exact maths is not what they're looking for. You can at different stages, if you feel like it, you can simplify your calculations, right? So in the 8-hour peak hour window, it stands at around, 500, which basically tells me that in the non-peak hours, right, which is at 50% run rate, but is, like from 8 hours, I have right now moved to like 16 hours, right, which is double. I can then understand, how much time it will take in the non-peak hours, right? And basically then add it up to give that number to the interviewer. At the last stage, I may want to think of, certain edge conditions that may happen, right? For example, in this case, I could think of, what about, uh, you know, uh, different planes which land, right? Like as interconnecting cities. So let's say the plane is supposed to go from Delhi to Trichy, but they have a landover in Bangalore, right? So how do I really accommodate for such kind of planes? So at the end, before you throw out the final answer, just take a moment to think of any edge cases that may be applicable, which then you can plug into the equation, right? So that is how you can actually approach these guesstimate questions. Again, if you could share a notepad or just keep walking through your math, at different steps, that will just make sure that your interviewer is really being able to follow what you're saying. And it becomes especially important in virtual interviews, right? Moving on to the third skill set where you may be judged on is actually a lot of situational questions, right? So remember, as a product manager, there are these certain skill sets that you're required to demonstrate day in, day out, right? So they could ask you a lot of situational questions around that, right? So for example, one of your key roles is to be able to, have good stakeholder relationships and also be able to influence your stakeholders, right? So they may want to know how effective you could be at that, and hence they may throw out a question saying that, mention a time when your business team did not agree with the feature that you were trying to prioritize, but how did you go about still convincing your partners in order to prioritize or in order to put that feature onto the roadmap? Another example could be around prioritization, right? So let's say that your tech team came back to you saying that, they don't have enough bandwidth to work on that feature, but you truly believed that this feature is really going to move the needle for you. Then how did you partner with your engineering team and, you got this feature prioritized? So certain situational questions will maybe asked. And what I really like to use is the STAR or the STAR framework, where you're able to clearly articulate the situation, the action that you took, and the result, right? So basically clearly articulate the business impact, of the final outcome, right? So this framework would really help you articulate your answer in this mechanism. The fourth thing that I want to actually touch on is around technical depth, right? So one of your key stakeholders is going to be the tech team, the engineering team. So it is extremely important for you to be able to talk their language, for you to be able to convert a feature into a technical requirement, right? And for that, just prepare, a bit, just have a basic knowledge around the tech stack, what goes into the middleware, frontware, backend, have some knowledge around that. Be aware of the SDLC methodologies, right? Typically questions around agile and agile scrum ceremonies do get asked, so make sure that you understand those. You may also want to work with your mentor, with a product manager, to truly understand how does the feature prioritization and implementation really happens. And lastly, make yourself cognizant with the product management tools, right? So Jira, Confluence, just have basic understanding of these, which you can then articulate in your interviews as well, right? So I think this is all the content that I had today. So hope you guys had some learning around it. Happy to take any questions either in this forum or through LinkedIn or any other platform.